Well, it's hard to say because in our timeline, the War of 1812 was extremely unpopular in Britain. They just didn't feel the need to fight a war in North America, especially against the Americans, who they were trying to trade with. But if they had lost valuable territories to the Americans, then that would change everything. The British people would likely rally behind their flag, feeling that the very survival of the empire was at stake. It's also possible that the American people would feel the same way. After all, if the US had taken losses in the South or the West Indies, then public opinion would have been much harsher on the French. So ironically, American and British interests could end up aligning. This changes the equation for the war drastically. The US and Britain would likely be fighting tooth and nail for every inch of North America. And depending on how strong the American military was, this could go either way. If the US was able to hold their own, then maybe the British would have lost valuable manpower trying to subdue them. If the US got absolutely crushed, then the British could move west without fear of interference. If the war ended with the status quo antebellum, then nothing would change because the British never lost any territory. But if the British did lose territory, then we could see some massive changes. For example, if the British lost Canada, then the US would have more incentive to annex it. After all, why not expand Manifest Destiny a generation early? Or perhaps Louisiana would be split between the victorious Americans and the Spanish, ending decades of border disputes. Or maybe the British would lose the West Indies to the Americans, giving them a taste of empire early on. But ultimately, the results of the war would depend on how involved the Americans were. If they just provided a small military force, then the war would probably continue much like our own, with the Americans not playing a decisive role. But if the Americans threw their entire weight behind the French, then they could decisively swing the balance of power. However, there's a good chance that the American military would be inexperienced and disorganized compared to their European counterparts. It might take time for the US to raise and train large armies and navies, so it's unlikely that they would be ready to fight right away. This means that even if America was pro-French, it might take some time for them to get involved. But assuming that America did eventually join the war, how would it change the outcome? Well, probably not much. Even with the Americans, the coalition couldn't beat the British. So the only difference would be that the US would share in the defeat. Perhaps the Americans would rally together after a humiliating loss, choosing to side with the victors and gaining lucrative post-war territories. Or maybe they would blame the Europeans for getting them involved in the first place, returning to isolationism.